The first thing Colton Weaver noticed when he stepped off the shuttle was the smell. It wasn't bad exactly, just sharp and metallic, like a thunderstorm had decided to live in the air permanently. He wrinkled his nose and shifted the strap of his backpack higher onto his shoulder. A tall, pale blue alien stood waiting by a squat tower with blinking green lights. Its long arms hung stiffly at its sides, and its large silver eyes blinked once, slowly. "You are the human," it said, voice flat like a machine. "Yeah," Colton said, holding out his hand automatically. "Colton Weaver." "Nice to meet you." The alien stared at his hand like it was a weapon. When Colton dropped it awkwardly, the alien nodded once. "I am Velan. I am your mediator for this research exchange." Colton gave a small wave instead. "Cool. Where are we heading?" Velan turned without answering and started walking across the landing platform. Colton hustled to keep up, boots clanging against the metal. The city around the platform looked half-finished. Tall spires stabbed into the low-hanging clouds, and wide roads looped through massive structures that reminded Colton of termite mounds. A few more aliens, all different shades of blue or gray, moved about, none paying him any attention. As they wove through the streets, Velan spoke again. "You must be cautious. Our environment is rich with organisms not found on your world." "I figured," Colton said. "Got all my shots before coming. Even took that weird antiviral you sent." Velan gave a slow blink. "That is not sufficient protection." Colton frowned but said nothing. He had been briefed about the planet, sure, but nobody had made it sound that bad. Besides, he had been through worse. 2 tours in the Amazon had taught him a thing or two about surviving in places that wanted to kill you. They reached a low building with walls that shimmered faintly like oil on water. Inside, the air was cooler and the metallic smell faded into something sweeter. "This will be your habitation," Velan said. "You must remain within the shielded zones unless accompanied." Colton dropped his pack by the door and stretched his arms overhead. "Got it. No wandering off." Velan hesitated. "There are additional hazards." "Like what?" Before Velan could answer, a sharp buzzing filled the air. Colton turned his head just in time to see a tiny black speck zip toward him. Without thinking, he slapped it against his neck. It made a faint splat. Velan made a sound halfway between a gasp and a whimper. "You have been stung," Velan said. Colton rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, little bugger got me. Doesn't even itch." Velan moved closer, inspecting the spot with horror. "That was an Ikari. Its sting is fatal within minutes to most species." Colton shrugged. "I'm used to mosquito bites." Velan froze. "You survived." Colton grinned. "Happens all the time back home." "You ever been to Florida?" Velan backed away slowly, eyes wide. "You must report any symptoms immediately." "Sure thing," Colton said, already wandering over to inspect the kitchenette setup. "Hey, do you guys have coffee here?" For the next 2 hours, Velan kept a distance of at least 10 feet from him, only approaching to hand over a small packet of local food paste that tasted like cardboard dipped in mint. Colton didn't mind. He spent the time setting up his gear and running a few basic diagnostics on his atmospheric equipment. He noticed Velan peeking around the corner several times, watching him like he might suddenly drop dead. By the time evening rolled around, Colton felt a little tired but otherwise fine. No swelling, no fever, no dizziness. He made a note in his digital log and decided to call it a night. The bed was softer than he expected and the lights dimmed automatically when he lay down. Just as he was drifting off, he heard the faint buzz of another insect. He slapped at the air lazily and rolled over. The next morning, Velan was waiting outside the door, flanked by 2 other aliens wearing what looked suspiciously like hazmat suits. "You must come with us," Velan said. Colton yawned. "Morning to you, too." They led him to a large building near the city center. Inside, the walls were lined with tanks full of strange creatures, some floating, some crawling. A group of aliens in long white coats circled him, murmuring in their language. An older alien with crimson skin stepped forward. "I am Corin," it said. "Chief biologist." Colton nodded. "Colton Weaver." "Guy who doesn't die from bug stings." Corin did not laugh. "You were stung by Ikari, yet you live. We must understand this anomaly. Anomaly, huh? Colton said, scratching his neck. I guess you could call it that. Back home, we got bugs that bite you, sting you, suck your blood, give you diseases. We just kind of deal with it. Corin gestured to a table. Lie down. Colton hesitated. What for? Tests. Non-invasive. He sighed and climbed onto the table. The surface hummed under him, and a soft blue light scanned over his body. Velan stood stiffly by the door, arms crossed. Colton glanced over. You look like you expect me to explode. It remains a possibility, Velan said. The scan finished, and Corin studied the results on a floating screen. Your immune responses. Formidable. Rapid neutralization of foreign venom proteins. Unusual. Colton shrugged again. Built tough, I guess. Corin tapped a few controls and another tank rolled forward. Inside buzzed a larger version of the insect that had stung him. Colton sat up fast. Hold on. What's that? A Varrock, Corin said. Deadlier than Akari. Fatal within seconds. Colton swung his legs off the table. Yeah, I don't volunteer for second rounds. You will not be stung, Corin said. Observation only. Colton watched warily as the tank was opened slightly. The insect zipped out, circling him. He stayed perfectly still. The Varrock hovered, then darted forward. Colton flinched, but it merely brushed his arm before zooming back into its tank. Corin frowned. No sting. Curious. Maybe it knows better, Colton said, rubbing his arms. Animals can smell fear. Or blood. Or something. Further tests are required, Corin said. For who? Colton asked. You. Of course. The next few days blurred into a routine of scans, controlled exposures, and endless questions. Colton learned to recognize the different types of insects they showed him, each nastier than the last. Some had paralysis toxins, others acid burns. He survived each exposure with nothing worse than a few red welts. The aliens grew increasingly agitated. Velan hovered near constantly, often muttering to himself. One morning, Colton woke to find a small insect sitting on his pillow, watching him with beady eyes. Without thinking, he flicked it across the room. A loud alarm blared instantly. Velan burst into the room, eyes wild. You have been exposed to a Trellick. Colton sat up, heart pounding. What does that one do? Immediate cardiac shutdown in 90% of cases. Colton pressed a hand to his chest. His heart was hammering, but it was definitely still beating. I feel fine, he said. Velan stared at him like he had grown a second head. Within hours, Colton found himself back in the lab, surrounded by even more scientists. They argued loudly, occasionally glancing at him like he was a ticking bomb. Finally, Corin turned to him. You must allow us to study your biology. Invasive procedures may be necessary. Colton crossed his arms. Define invasive. Surgical extraction of tissues. Yeah, that's going to be a no, Colton said. Velan stepped forward. You misunderstand. This could save lives. Even ours. Colton hesitated. He wasn't heartless. If what he had could help, maybe it was worth it. Maybe we can find another way, he said. Blood samples, skin samples. But I'm not going under the knife unless it's absolutely necessary. Corin nodded reluctantly. Agreed. For now. Over the next week, they took enough blood to make him dizzy and scraped enough skin samples to patch a football field. Colton bore it all with gritted teeth, recovering slowly in his quarters each night. The bruises on his arms mapped a story of relentless poking and prodding. One evening, Velan visited him carrying a small container. This is for you, Velan said. A token of respect. Colton opened it cautiously. Inside, nestled in soft fabric, was a small medallion shaped like the Varrock insect that had tried to sting him. We honor survivors, Velan said. Colton chuckled weakly. Thanks, I guess. I'll try not to get stung again. You are changing perceptions, Velan said. Many believed humans were fragile. Your resilience is noted. Colton leaned back against the wall, feeling the weight of the past days settle into his bones. Yeah, he said. We're good at getting by. Even when it sucks. Velan tilted his head. A remarkable trait. Colton smiled tiredly. Welcome to humanity. Colton sat on a low bench inside a different part of the complex, tapping his fingers against his knee. The room was stark, walls a dull bronze color with a single panel displaying shifting alien symbols. It had been 3 days since the whole medallion business, and he hadn't seen much of Velan or Corin since. Instead, he'd been shuffled between minor officials who avoided meeting his eyes. Now, he was waiting for someone called Director Thas, supposedly a higher-up who oversaw interspecies health protocols. Judging by how long he'd been sitting there, Thas took their time. Finally, the door slid open without a sound. A tall figure entered, skin a deep green, wearing layered robes that shimmered slightly when they moved. "You are Weaver," Thas said without preamble. "That's me," Colton said, standing up. Thas made no move to shake his hand. He wasn't expecting them to, but merely gestured toward a smaller side door. "You will follow." He did, trailing behind through a narrow corridor that sloped downward. The air grew cooler, and a faint hum vibrated through the floor under his boots. After several turns, they entered a cavernous chamber. In the center stood a transparent cylinder, at least 20 feet high, filled with swirling pale mist. Around it, clusters of aliens in muted uniforms monitored screens and adjusted dials. Thas turned toward him. "This is our environmental stress analysis unit," they said. "We simulate planetary dangers here." Colton crossed his arms. "Sounds fun. You will be tested further," Thas continued. "Voluntarily." He raised an eyebrow. "Define voluntarily in this context." "You may refuse," Thas said, "but your cooperation will greatly advance our understanding." Colton considered it. So far, nothing here had actually hurt him, and it beat sitting around getting stared at. "All right," he said. "What's the plan?" Thas nodded once and gestured to a technician who approached carrying a thin, flexible suit. "You will wear this," the technician said. "Minimal protection. We must observe your natural resistance." Colton took the suit. It was lighter than it looked, oddly stretchy, and had no obvious fastenings. "Where do I change?" he asked. A section of the wall shimmered and opened into a small cubicle. He stepped inside, stripped, and wriggled into the suit, which clung to him like a second skin. When he emerged, Thas studied him critically. "You are ready," Thas said. Colton stepped toward the cylinder where a panel slid open. Cool mist licked at his ankles as he entered. The door closed behind him with a hiss. "Remain still," Thas's voice said from a hidden speaker. The mist thickened, swirling faster. Colton squinted, trying to make out shapes beyond the glass. His skin prickled under the suit, and he tasted copper on his tongue. Without warning, something darted through the mist, a flash of iridescent wings. A rapid buzz. He tensed, but it didn't come near. A second shape zipped past, then a third. His heart rate picked up. "Exposure Phase 1, Thas announced. The mist changed color, shifting to a pale gold. Colton coughed once, a dry rasp in his throat, but otherwise felt fine. Minutes passed. The buzzing grew louder, and he caught glimpses of larger forms moving through the vapor. Still, nothing touched him. "Exposure Phase 2, Thas said. The mist deepened to a sickly green. The temperature dropped sharply, and Colton shivered despite the suit. His teeth began to chatter. His hands, hanging loose at his sides, turned pale. A thin, needle-like insect hovered directly in front of his face. He held still, barely breathing. The insect darted forward, tapped the suit, and zipped away. A faint sting bloomed on his shoulder. "Target contact detected," Thas said. Colton rolled his shoulder experimentally. No numbness, no swelling. Just a pinprick. "How do you feel?" Thas asked. "Cold," Colton said, and mildly annoyed. A pause. Proceeding to Phase 3. The mist cleared abruptly, sucked away by hidden vents. The sudden brightness stung his eyes. Before he could adjust, a new creature dropped from above a squat, beetle-like thing the size of a dinner plate. It landed on the floor with a heavy thud. Colton backed up instinctively. "Remain calm," Thas said. The beetle scuttled toward him, fast and deliberate. He sidestepped, but it pivoted smoothly, tracking him. You said minimal protection, Colton muttered under his breath. The beetle reared up, revealing a glistening set of mandibles. It launched forward, clamping onto his calf. Pain lanced up his leg, sharp and immediate. Subject has been engaged, Das noted clinically. Gritting his teeth, Colton reached down and pried the beetle off. It resisted, but he twisted sharply, and it dropped away, skittering back into the mist. He staggered, favoring his bitten leg. Assessment, Das asked. Feels like someone jammed a screwdriver into my leg, Colton said through gritted teeth. Still standing, though. A series of clicks sounded from the hidden speaker's alien approval, he guessed. The panel slid open again. Exit, Das said. Colton limped out of the cylinder. The technician approached with a scanner, waving it over his injured leg. A holographic display showed swelling and minor tissue damage. Administering neutralization agent, the technician said. A cool spray hit the wound, numbing it almost instantly. Colton sagged with relief. You exhibited rapid clotting and limited inflammatory response, Das said, watching him closely. Unusual. Guess I'm just stubborn, Colton said. Das tilted their head. Or highly evolved. He didn't argue. After changing out of the suit, he was led to a smaller room with a low couch and a table piled with alien food packets. None of it looked particularly appetizing, but he grabbed a gray one at random and tore it open. It smelled faintly of cinnamon. Velan appeared in the doorway, looking more composed than before. You continue to surprise us, Velan said. Not really trying to, Colton said, chewing thoughtfully. Just used to rough conditions. Velan stepped inside, hands clasped behind his back. There is debate among the councils. Some argue you should be studied more extensively. Others believe you represent a diplomatic opportunity. Colton swallowed. Diplomatic opportunity? Proof that humans possess desirable survival traits. Potential allies against environmental threats. He leaned back on the couch. So, you want to recruit me or dissect me? Great options. Velan hesitated. Not you personally. Your species. Colton laughed. A low bark. You sure about that? Most humans aren't exactly fans of getting bit by deadly bugs. Velan regarded him silently for a moment. We have endured threats for generations. Few survive prolonged exposure. You adapt instinctively. Colton shrugged. Adapt or die. That's pretty much the human motto. There was a long pause. Then Velan said, there is an upcoming demonstration. A contest of endurance. You are invited to participate. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of contest? Exposure to controlled hazards. A test of resilience. Colton wiped his hands on his pants. Sounds like another day at the office. Velan almost smiled. Almost. Victory would solidify your standing. And if I lose? You are unlikely to die, Velan said, which was not remotely comforting. Colton stood up, stretching his sore leg carefully. All right, I'll do it. Velan inclined his head. Preparation begins tomorrow. He left without another word. Colton stared at the empty doorway, wondering what exactly he'd just agreed to. Then he looked at the half-eaten food packet and tossed it aside. Guess I better get some sleep, he muttered. Later that night, lying on the too-soft bed, he stared at the ceiling, counting the faint pulses of the overhead lights. The ache in his leg had dulled, and he felt the familiar buzz of adrenaline wearing off. He thought about home, about storms battering the Gulf Coast, about swatting away mosquitoes the size of quarters, about patching up snake bites with duct tape and a shot of whiskey when the clinic was 20 miles away. Maybe surviving wasn't about being the strongest. Maybe it was just about being too stubborn to quit. Around him, the alien city pulsed with its quiet, unknowable life. And somewhere beyond the walls, the next challenge was already waiting. The demonstration was scheduled for the 4th cycle after Colton agreed, which gave him exactly 3 local days to prepare. He spent most of that time walking laps around the city's shielded zones, stretching out the stiffness in his leg and trying to acclimate to the thinner air. The morning of the event, he found Velan waiting outside his quarters, holding a small, flat box. You are to wear this, Velan said, handing it over. Colton opened the box and whistled low. Inside was a lightweight exoskeleton suit, matte black with faint gold threads running along the joints. It looked more advanced than anything he'd seen back at the research station on Mars. "No offense, but you guys really didn't need to dress me up," Colton said, pulling out the suit and examining the flexible plates. "It is ceremonial," Velan replied. "Symbolic of resilience." Colton slid into the suit, surprised at how easily it fit. The material flexed with his movements, offering support without restricting him. "You will be facing 3 environmental simulations," Velan continued, each designed to test different survival parameters. "No lethal organisms will be present." Colton tugged at one of the sleeves. "Define lethal." Velan's head tilted slightly. "Organisms that would guarantee immediate death. Anything slower is acceptable." "Reassuring," Colton muttered. By mid-morning, he was standing in the center of an open arena surrounded by tiered seating where hundreds of aliens gathered. Most were shades of blue and gray, but here and there he spotted greens, oranges, and even a few shimmering silvers. An official draped in white and gold raised a long staff. A low gong boomed through the air, and the crowd fell silent. Das appeared at Colton's side, holding a thin tablet. "You will enter the first zone shortly," Das said. "You may request withdrawal at any point." "I'll pass," Colton said, rolling his shoulders. A section of the arena floor slid open, revealing a downward ramp. Without ceremony, he jogged down, boots thudding softly. The first zone looked like a swamp. Murky water pooled across the floor, and thick vines dangled from the ceiling. Strange, bulbous plants bobbed on the water's surface, releasing faint puffs of violet mist. A voice crackled from overhead. "Phase 1. Toxic flora navigation." Colton took a deep breath and stepped into the water. It was cold, seeping through the suit almost immediately. He moved carefully, avoiding the plants as best he could. Halfway across, one of the plants expelled a burst of mist directly at his face. He coughed, the taste bitter on his tongue, but kept moving. Another mist cloud hit him square in the chest. His nostrils burned, and his vision blurred slightly. He blinked rapidly, focusing on the far side of the swamp. By the time he stumbled onto solid ground, his skin felt clammy, and a headache throbbed behind his eyes. A small group of medics waited, scanning him quickly. "Elevated histamine response," one said, checking a portable monitor. "Normal allergic reaction," Colton said, waving them off. "Give it a minute." The medics exchanged glances but backed away. A second gong sounded, and a new doorway opened. He entered the next zone. This one resembled a barren wasteland. The temperature soared instantly, and dry, abrasive winds kicked up fine, shimmering dust. Visibility dropped to a few feet. "Phase 2, thermal and particulate endurance," the speaker announced. Colton pulled a scarf from the suit's belt and wrapped it around his mouth and nose. The heat hammered at him, sweat pooling under the suit. He moved forward steadily, choosing his steps carefully. The dust stung his eyes, and every breath tasted like metal. A jagged shadow loomed ahead. As he neared, he saw it was a structure made of twisted metal, half buried in the sand. He ducked inside, grateful for the slight reprieve from the wind. Inside, it was even hotter, but at least the dust didn't cut at his skin. He rested one hand against the wall, feeling the vibration of the storm outside. After catching his breath, he pushed onward, exiting the shelter and trudging across the open ground. His muscles ached from the heat, and he could feel the early stages of dehydration setting in. Halfway to the exit point, the ground shifted under him. He stumbled but caught himself before falling. A small sinkhole had opened beneath his left foot. He yanked it free, heart hammering. "Keep moving," he muttered to himself. By the time he reached the end of the wasteland, his suit was streaked with dust and his lips were cracked and dry. Another group of medics waited, spraying a cooling mist over him and offering a small pouch of electrolyte solution. He drank gratefully, feeling the liquid revive him slightly. "Core temperature elevated but stable," one medic said. "He is within safe parameters," another added. The third and final zone loomed ahead. Colton squared his shoulders and walked forward. The last environment was a cavern, lit dimly by bioluminescent fungi. The air was thick and damp, and a low thrumming noise echoed through the space. Phase 3, Endurance Under Predatory Threat, the speaker announced. Colton frowned. Nobody had mentioned predators. He moved cautiously, scanning the shadows. A sudden movement caught his eye. A creature the size of a large dog skittered across the cavern floor, its body a mass of chitinous plates and spindly legs. Colton froze. The creature sniffed the air, then let out a low, rattling hiss. It charged. He sidestepped, barely avoiding the snapping mandibles. The creature spun around faster than he expected. Colton grabbed a loose rock from the ground and hurled it at the creature's head. It struck with a dull thud. The beast staggered, dazed. Seizing the opportunity, Colton sprinted toward a narrow passageway at the far end of the cavern. The creature gave chase, but the passage was too tight for its bulk. It clawed at the walls, shrieking in frustration. Colton didn't stop running until he burst through into the open air of the arena. The crowd erupted into a chorus of whistles and rhythmic drumming, the alien equivalent of applause. Das approached, holding out a small, smooth disc. "You have succeeded in all phases," Das said. "Your resilience exceeds projections." Colton accepted the disc, feeling its slight warmth against his palm. "Guess I'm just hard to kill," he said, grinning despite the exhaustion dragging at his limbs. "You have altered perceptions," Das said. "Many assumed humans were brittle, limited to narrow environmental bands. You have demonstrated otherwise." Velan appeared beside Das, a rare gleam of approval in his eyes. "You will be honored among our records," Velan said. "A symbol of adaptive endurance." Colton tucked the disc into a pouch on his suit. "Glad to be useful." A procession formed, leading him back toward the central plaza. Banners unfurled, displaying stylized images of insects crossed out by human hands. As they walked, Velan leaned closer. "There is talk of further collaboration," Velan said. "Not just with you, but with your species." Colton laughed softly. "You sure you're ready for that? Humans don't exactly do anything halfway." Velan considered this. Perhaps that is what is needed. The sun, if it could be called that, dipped lower, casting long shadows over the city. The banners caught the light, their colors shifting in the breeze. Colton felt a strange warmth in his chest, something beyond the lingering adrenaline or the fading aches in his muscles. Maybe surviving wasn't just about endurance. Maybe it was about proving again and again that giving up was never an option. As the procession wound through the streets and alien voices lifted in a strange, haunting harmony, Colton Weaver walked at the front, a living testament to the stubborn, reckless, unstoppable spirit of humanity.